as she said, my name is Mary Jones, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what I did this summer in Russia. So the title of my talk is Moskovskovo Leto, which means Moscow summer. And all around Moscow, they have all sorts of decorations and celebration about summer, and really some pretty things. And I decided to include that picture of one of the areas downtown that was nicely decorated. All right, so first of all, just a little bit about what the Moscow Texas Connections program was. It was a Fulbright-Hays Group Projects Abroad program. So what this was is the University of Texas Center for Russian and Eastern European and Eurasian Studies applied for a grant through the Department of Education. And so this is a federally funded program for students studying intermediate and advanced Russian language. Like I said, this is Fulbright-Hays, so they have several different grants set up to support the study of foreign languages as well as other topics. But in order to be eligible for this, pretty much you had to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident and then be a full-time student of a Texas university studying a foreign language and be at intermediate level, so about 2 years, or in some cases an intense program. And then the obligations, well, you had to spend 10 weeks in Russia, but you also had to do pre and post exams in the Russian language and then a post-program survey for the Department of Education. They want to make sure that their money is actually going, for a good reason. All right, then was the flight. So started off, we flew from Austin to New York, and I want to thank Miss Laurel Scott for taking me. She right away offered to take me to Austin, and her mom helped us. We stayed there, and then from Austin to New York, and to New York, Moscow, and that was on here. This was the screen on the plane, and it was really cool. It had interactive, all sorts of movies you could watch to try and make your flight go by faster. On here it says 8:33 was the flying time. Took us about 9 hours to get to Moscow, so not too bad. We had an overnight flight and got there all right. All right, so then the 10 weeks in Moscow. This is just a little glimpse of what our schedule was like. So we were pretty full. They had a lot of things planned out. The program directors told us that we were lucky and maybe unlucky. He wasn't too sure because it was kind of an experiment. This was the last year of their grant. They had done this for 3 years, and we were the last year. So they had a little bit of leftover money because the ruble had fallen. And so the amount that they had allocated for each year, we had a little bit extra. So that means we got to do a little bit extra excursions, but that also meant our trip was a little bit more intense. So I think it was a benefit for sure. We got to have a little bit more perks than the other groups before us. When we arrived, we checked in at our dorms, so our общежитие, and these dorms were actually former military housing. They apparently, from these dorms, some of the soldiers, they have a plaque out front, soldiers left here and marched to the front from our dorms. They now belong to the Higher School of Economics, where we were studying, and they are student housing. They paired us each with a Russian roommate. So as part of the program, we were supposed to be as immersed as we could. So each student from Texas had a Russian roommate that we could talk to and get to know and practice our Russian. Most of the students at this dorm were either linguistics majors or business majors, and a lot of them were very interested in what we were doing and really anxious to help us with our Russian skills. Now the school that we were at is Vysshaya Shkola Ekonomika, or the Higher School of Economics. And they have several different campuses. We were at this campus, which for those of you that can read, this was actually the University of Car Making and Car Building, but they had since changed it to more of the School of Linguistics and Language Learning. So it was not actually, we were not learning about cars. We weren't sure, we couldn't ever figure out, maybe they, in another part, were still working on building cars. We never saw evidence of that. But maybe they just didn't change the name. We weren't too sure why. No one knew either why why it was still called that. For the summer, we were, part of our obligations were 200 hours of classroom instruction, and that included, so just a practicum class, which was grammar and application, so just Russian speaking, practicing our speaking skills. Then phonetics class, we had a phonetics class, a reading class, and then special topics lectures every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. And these varied from history, culture, politics, economics, and geography. And yes, it was all in Russian. So it was really great. It was great. This is just kind of our everyday schedule, or at least our Monday through Thursday schedule. We had class from 10 till about 4 usually, and then we went home and worked on our homework, or we had different excursions that we then went out and looked at the city, or in our free time we could do a lot of different things. Now the commute from the dorm to the university, there was 3 ways that you could get there. You could either walk, you could take the metro, or eventually we figured out a bus route. And so walking, that was about a 2.5 mile walk. It would take about 45 minutes. That was actually, until we found the bus, that was the fastest. The metro, it was pretty fast and interesting to go on the metro. That was about a 45-minute, and you still were walking about 1.5 miles. And then you had to fight all the other people that were trying to get to where they were going on time. And then finally we found the bus route, and that was the shortest. We figured out you could walk about 1 mile, hop on the bus, and you could be there in about 35 minutes. So that was pretty, when we got that was pretty good, especially for the rainy days to getting to class. All right, now a little bit about the food. So what was I eating? Well, we had the typical dishes like borscht and pelmeni, and then kurica and grechka, which was one of the biggest things at the stolovaya across from our university where we ate, which is like a cafeteria-style restaurant. The chicken and the grechka was the big thing, and it's basically a buckwheat, but it's very popular there. They also have pastas made from buckwheat. They had rice as well, but the buckwheat was one of the hot items there. Then all sorts of food. They took us to a couple different, not only Russian cuisine restaurants, but also Uzbek restaurants and Ukrainian and Georgian food. Oh, the Georgian food, they tell you, it's incredible. So if you ever have a chance to go to a Georgian restaurant, I would highly encourage it. I hope that you have already eaten, because these might make you hungry. But some really good food. And then this drink here on the side was called tarhun, and they really, or a lot of the people really like this drink, and it's considered very healthy and beneficial for your health. It's pretty much water infused with tarragon, but they have a strong belief that this is really good for you and healthy. Water and that's like mineral water that is carbonated, which you always have to specify без газа or газа, because they'll give you carbonated if you don't like that, but actually pretty good. Now I included these just so you could see. There's also some, if you go over to Russia, you can still find some of your essentials if you are a Starbucks drinker. So there was Starbucks everywhere there too. And then Papa John's and Krispy Kreme. So if you're worried, if you're planning a trip to Russia, that you're not going to have anything to eat, well, there's plenty of American type restaurants as well. Also Burger King, McDonald's, all the major chains are also held there. And to our delight, we found 2 restaurants that were pretty good. This Pancho Villa, we were craving some Mexican food, and so we found the Pancho Villa restaurant and checked it out. It was pretty good. And then we also found a Texas barbecue restaurant, and this was a pretty neat find. Their barbecue was pretty good. They had Texas smokers in the back that they were very proud of. They let you know that everything was made from a Texas barbecue pit. And we even, when we ate there, we got a big group of us together and went and ate there, and then talked to the owners and the chefs, told them we're from Texas and we approve. And so they were very delighted that we approved of their barbecue. Apparently, two of them had come over to the United States and stayed in Austin for a time and had worked at a barbecue place in Austin and then had went back and opened up this restaurant. So it was a lot of fun, and our Russian friends that we took there, they really enjoyed it, and they said, "This is what you eat like all the time?" So they were a little bit surprised about that, but it was very good. All right, the next thing I want to tell you about is the Moscow Metro, and they just recently, when I was putting this picture on, I had asked my friend, "This second ring, is that actually open?" Because in the time that I've gotten back and that I'm giving this presentation, they've actually opened more stations. So that outer pink ring, that has just been opened, or at least some of the stations on that pink ring are open, which I think is actually, they finished this project earlier than planned. When I looked, I found an article that said they weren't supposed to be done until 2019, so I'm sure they are delighted about that as well, that it's already open. But the Moscow Metro is one of the neatest things in Moscow, in my opinion. It is very efficient. It's pretty clean, especially if you've ever used the New York subway or the subway or the underground in Washington, D.C. It's very clean, it's very efficient, and it's really pretty neat. It's almost like a museum in itself. In fact, there was tours, when we'd use the metro, you could find, especially on the weekends, tourists on a guided tour through the metro system, because the stations, here's just two of them here, I mean, they're incredible. They've got mosaics, sculptures, all sorts of things in those metro stations. So they're really nice, and we would just, some days, I would just get on one and ride it around and get off on a station and see what it looked like, because they were just really cool. They each have a theme, and so each metro station, depending on what its name is and what its theme is designed and decorated to fit that theme. And so there's all sorts of the Revolution Square, even one for Dostoevsky, some of the authors. They even have their own metro station where they've got pictures and sculptures of them and of their characters. So it's pretty neat. And as I have included here, first one opened in 1939, and the construction actually continued during World War II. It was also used as a bomb shelter, and still is. They have, in some of the metro lines, they can actually, close doors off and create a self-sustaining environment in case of something such as nuclear fallout. That's what they were preparing it for. But several people use the metro. So you can see about 9.7 million people a day, and annually it's estimated over 2.5 or almost 2.5 billion people. Now, if you look back at the construction, just keep in mind the brown line. One thing that they told us about the metro is that when it was built, the architect brought the plans to Stalin, and Stalin looked at them and he approved them. And there was two different versions of the story. One was that he used his stamp and he approved it and he put it right in the middle. And then the architect thought, oh, I guess he wants a ring around to connect all the stations. So that was one story. And then the other one was that he put his cup of coffee down right in the middle of the metro, and that left the brown ring. And so the architect thought, oh, I'm supposed to put a ring in the metro. And they did that. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it makes for a pretty good story. The other neat thing that we discovered about the metro, and we were told this, but then it was really cool because it's true. When you're riding in, so you've got all these lines that go across this circle. So those are your radial lines. When you're riding into the city, the announcer who announces the stations is a male voice. And then when you ride out of the city, it's a female voice. And our guide told us that this is because they equate this to the boss calling you into work, and then when you leave, your wife calling you back home. But the reason for this, and it also works on the rings, I think it's clockwise is male and counterclockwise is female, it's in order to help out those who are blind and impaired. So it's actually for a reason to help out blind, to make it easier for them. All right, now this was extremely challenging to give you some pictures of what Moscow is like without keeping you here until 9:30 at night. So I had to filter through so many pictures, and I have several more. If you're interested in Moscow at all, I can show you a lot more pictures. But few of these pictures, so the one at the top is the Moscow city, and that's kind of in the middle of Moscow, and they've built these very tall skyscraper buildings, I think just so that they can have them, because some of our Russian friends told us that there's actually several floors of these buildings that are not being used. We are not sure if it's just because they don't like these buildings, or if they're just not in a useful location, but apparently there's several floors of these that are vacant. But they have this Moscow city with the skyscrapers, so we kind of speculated that possibly it's just so they can say they have skyscrapers, where the rest of the buildings are about at the kind of the typical, a lot of the typical Soviet-esque Stalin era the buildings, not quite these high skyscrapers. Now this, down here at the corner, I thought this was an interesting story. This is on the river in Moscow, and it's Peter the Great. But it didn't start out to be Peter the Great. It actually started out to be Christopher Columbus. And the artist who made this sculpture, didn't make it in Moscow, but they made it as a gift to the United States as Christopher Columbus. Well, we didn't want it. We didn't think it looked pretty. So we said, no, the United States, we don't want this sculpture. Then they tried to give it to several other countries, and they also did not like it. So they decided, okay, the artists cut off the head of Christopher Columbus and put Peter the Great's head on instead, and said, here, Russia, you can have it. And so it still is standing there in the river as now Peter the Great. And if you look close enough, you can see that it's a little bit, the head and the rest of the body are not quite right. But I just thought that was just a funny story, so I wanted to include that. And then from the picture, you can see from the river a nice view of the city. Some of the highlights, like I said, there was so much. It was really hard to include, or impossible to include everything. But one of the highlights was going to the Bolshoi Theater. Like I said, they had extra money, so we got some extra perks, and this was one of them. We were able to see the Tsar's Bride, which was an opera at this theater. And it was incredible. The music, everything, the set was really, really incredible. It was in Russian, but they, actually to our surprise, up at the top they had a translation in English. So I guess on several of their operas or plays, they also run a translation across. And it was actually kind of neat getting to, we also had the program, so while the opera was going on, I was trying to read the Russian and listen to the Russian, and then seeing the English translation. And sometimes they would kind of get a little loose with what they were translating. For example, when the man that was a German came, now I can't remember the word that they used, but it was not German. It was not a terribly derogatory term, but it was not the word for German that they used to describe him on the translation. So that was a very, very neat, once-in-a-lifetime experience. It was quite fun. Then here's just a few more, and this one popped up on the other one. Sorry about that. But this was around the Kremlin. So we were able to tour the Kremlin grounds and then also tour the Kremlin Palace. And here's inside. You can see gold everywhere. It was incredibly decorated. And inside the palace is where they would hold functions, and they currently do still hold functions where President Putin will host dignitaries or for official events that are typically televised or for pictures. Then we've got the Tsar's cannon. This cannon, as you can see, is quite huge. And it's facing, I believe it's facing the east, and they they say that that this cannon, they've never had to fire it, but they can. And if they had to, it's just kind of to ward off any enemies that would have come from the east whenever this was built. Although it's not, it's now within the Kremlin, and I don't think that you could fire it if you wanted to. You would, I don't know how much those cannonballs weigh, but I think it would take a good deal amount of people to actually load the cannon if it ever was needed. And then, of course, I had to include some pictures of Red Square. So at Red Square, you have the Historical Museum, and then, of course, St. Basil's Cathedral, and then GUM here, and Lenin's Mausoleum. I was able, you can go into Lenin's Mausoleum. They still have him encased in glass inside the mausoleum, and you can line up. It's free, but you can only, it's very odd hours. You just have to stand in this incredibly long line. You go through, and they just shuffle you through. You can't stop, can't take pictures, but you're allowed to walk around, see Lenin laying there, and then walk out. And when you walk out, though, you can see the rest, or several other Soviet leaders that are buried behind him. I think each year they have another debate about whether they should bury Lenin or keep him, and so far they still have kept him there, embalmed in the mausoleum. Now, the other building that I pointed you to, the one with all the lights right here, GUM. So if you saw the words, it would be G-U-M, which you would think gum, but it's GUM, so GUM, not gum. And inside this, it's a big shopping center where they kind of try to keep the Soviet style. They have these soda jerks with, again, we've got some tarhun and other flavors of soda that they'll make for you, and then several people in line for the typical morozhna. So that's ice cream, and I can say from experience that it's very, very delicious. Then we went to St. Petersburg. So we took a overnight train from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and it was about 8 hours. And again, we got to see so many different things at the monument of Peter the Great, and then the Hermitage. We were able to go in, and this is a huge collection of art and other cultural artifacts, and also full of tourists, especially Chinese tourists and Asian tourists, which can be actually quite a lot of fun. We had several different encounters with Asian tourists during the trip, and they were always very joyful and always excited and anxious to jump in your pictures with you as well. So we had a lot of fun with that. And then down here at the bottom, this is Peterhof, and this is a huge, I don't know how many acres this is, but it's basically like Russia's Versailles, and that's what it was created with that intent, to be just a very huge, a very opulent and elegant place to live. And we were able to see it's also full of fountains. So when it was designed, I can't remember the number of fountains either, but it was quite incredible. You would walk a ways, and then there'd be another fountain. And we were able to see when the first fountain was turned on. They turn them on in the mornings, and just that whole process, it took, I don't know, a good 10 minutes to get them all up and going because it was so intricate. And then when we were in St. Petersburg, we were also able to see the Swan Lake and at Alexandrovsky Theater, and it was also quite impressive. So we were lucky enough to not only get to go to the Bolshoi Theater, but also to Alexandrovsky Theater and watch the Swan Lake. So it was pretty incredible. Then one of the other things we were able to see was the collection of Fabergé eggs, which some of them are housed at the Kremlin, the Armory Museum at the Kremlin, but also in St. Petersburg they have the Fabergé Museum, and they have all the egg, or a lot of the eggs there, and they all are also quite a sight to see, quite incredible. So after St. Petersburg, we came back and had more class, and to a lot of my classmates' dismay, when we returned, we thought, oh, well, we got to miss a few days of class because we went to St. Petersburg, and that was it's a sanctioned trip, so we shouldn't have to, make up those days. Well, no, we ended up having to come an hour early for the next 2 weeks to make up the time we had lost. So don't worry if you think we skipped out on class. They made sure we made up for it. Then for one weekend, we went out to two of the very, very old Russian towns of Suzdal and Vladimir. And I believe that Vladimir was actually at one time the capital of Russia, if I'm not mistaken. And we were able to see some things out there. So we kind of got to get away from the city and look at the countryside. It was really quite beautiful. One of the things that Suzdal is known for are their wooden structures. So you can see in this picture, this was a small wooden church, and they had a small area of a field that was pretty much dedicated to displaying a lot of their woodworking skills and a lot of how it used to look when wood buildings were all that they had. They also were they told us about the fact that they used a lot of birch tree, and you can see at the top how it kind of gives this silver look. So they used this so that people from afar, they considered it their poor man's silver. So when you looked at these buildings from afar, it actually looked like they were gilded in silver, when in fact it was just wood. But these two towns are very, very old. They date back, I think, to 900, to like the year 900, and then into the thousands. And they are quite rich in their history. The significance of this trip, I think, also was to give us a sense of what it's like to go to your dacha. So in Russian homes, typically either the family or maybe a group of families will own a dacha. And in the summertime, on the weekends, or sometimes for a period of the summer, they will go out to their dacha. So that's a way for them to get out of the city, to kind of live in the country for a little bit. They usually have gardens there where they grow their own vegetables, and they have really just a time to get away and get out of the city. Here's just a few of the buildings that were out, or the dachas, and some of them are not dachas. Some of them people actually live there year-round. But a lot of the woodwork around these or on these houses were really quite incredible. Then we stayed at a place called Bogdarnia, and this was near Suzdal. It was an agro-tourism complex and a dairy farm. And the story behind this was the man that owns this was actually from England, and he came to Russia looking for work in the petroleum industry, and then eventually wound up, he married a woman from Russia, and they bought this land. Then he stopped working in the petroleum industry, and they both decided they wanted to raise dairy cows. So then they opened their dairy, and then she decided that she wanted to try this agro-tourism business. And so that's now currently, as he says, that's now what they're losing money at, is this. But they were quite a nice family. Essentially, I think you could equate it to some bed and breakfast in the United States. We stayed in this main house that they had tried to preserve some of the Soviet-era style to it. And then around the grounds, there was barns for horses. They held a lot of different horse events, equine events, equestrian events. And then they had like petting zoos and other things designed to kind of promote agriculture. We also got to go, and this was one of my favorite things to do, we went into the forest and we collected berries and mushrooms. So in Russian class, one of the first things that you learn is how to say going into the forest to collect mushrooms and berries. And I remember when we learned this in Miss Davis's class, we were like, you're not supposed to go in the forest and collect mushrooms. That's a no-no. You don't touch the mushrooms. But here, most of the mushrooms, although there are still some that you watch out for, but here you go out and you are able to collect the mushrooms and the berries. And I don't know if we collected or ate more of them while we were there, but we definitely, you can see, we did pretty good. Then we were able to, when we got back, we cooked up the mushrooms. So the yellow ones, and I think in Russian it's lisichki, and I think that they're called champignons. Yes, champignons. We've had those, but they were quite good. We were able to fry them up with onions and eat them, and then the berries we made ate some of them with our breakfast and then made a pie with the rest of them. So it was quite good, and I think it kind of rounded off our Russian experience to go out there. Then after they worked us collecting mushrooms and berries, we had a incredibly entertaining evening with this man Sergey, who he just kept popping up. When we were in Bagdarnia, we went to look at this pond, and on the way we saw him driving. Then we get to the pond and we're looking at it. We were supposed to swim, but ended up we weren't allowed to swim in it. But we're looking at the pond and looking at they had different. The moss was so thick that it created this what they called the pond of the floating islands, and the big huge moss mats with huge trees growing, would just float away. And so they said that it never looked the same way twice. But we're looking at this, and then all of a sudden Sergey pops up again. So he was our friend, but he kept finding us, and it was pretty fun. He was very talented at the accordion, and we were able to sing some songs with him, and you can see we had fun singing and dancing to some old Soviet folk songs. So that was another one of my favorite times. This is our group. There was 28 of us in all. In some of these pictures, we're not all there, but we had a pretty good group. 28 students from Texas. I was the only one from ASU. Several came from UT, from Texas A&M, a few from Rice, and then some other odd, like I think one from Baylor and one from UTEP and UTSA. We spent a lot of time with each other and got to know each other pretty well. Most of the students were either political science or international business or linguistics majors. There was one other biology major on the trip, and he was a pre-med student. Other than that, though, it was a lot of mostly liberal arts students, but we had a good time. Also met a lot of Russians, and here, when I was going, they had told us, okay, you should probably bring some, souvenirs to hand out. So I had been talking with my mom about what I could get, and then she sent me this box full of things that you would get at like a 4th of July parade, and some of these pins and pens, they said things like, America is great, and God bless America, and all these, incredibly patriotic things. And I was like, Mom, I can't take this. They're going to, send me in the gulag for this. I can't have this over there. But I took them anyways. I thought, well, maybe, if it's okay, I can give them out. Well, they loved them. Some of my friends, on the 4th of July, we handed these out, and I told them, if you were at a parade in America, this is the things that you would get. You'd stand around, and they'd throw these at you. And they're like, throw them at you? But, like, at you? And I said, well, to you. And they had a good time. You can see they really enjoyed getting those souvenirs. And then lots of friends. We had another one of, people ask me all the time, what was your favorite thing? And one of my really favorite things was the tutors. We had Russian tutors that were paid by the school that we were going to and set up especially for us. So they were there just for us. And unfortunately, some of my other classmates didn't take use of this. But I was incredibly lucky to get to know several of the tutors and really got to know them very well. We had a really good time. We also took them to the barbecue places. We took them on the 4th of July to the TGI Fridays that we found. So we tried. They really loved hearing about our lives, and we enjoyed hearing about theirs as well. There's a few of us that regularly went and got help from the tutors. Also, one of the students, the Texas students, had never really played games, and the picture in the upper corner, the Russian students actually really loved Texas Hold'em. And so they were teaching her how to play Texas Hold'em, which I just thought was kind of wild that the Russians were teaching Texas Hold'em to a Texan, but it worked out, and they enjoyed playing. All right, now a few additional. I wanted to include this if you are interested in Russian culture or Russian language. There's a few more additional sources of information that you can use. One thing is the Russian Life. This is a magazine that you can subscribe to and get the hard copy, or you can also subscribe to the email, and they will send you these little short emails, and has a link to this off-the-radar news on Russia, as they claim. And it's really quite interesting stories. They have present them in also a comical way, and so it's very, very good to kind of keep up with the current events. And then also, if you're really into it as well, this Johnson's Russia list, one of our speakers and lecturers over there told me about this program, but this website, russialist.org, has an incredible wealth of information on current events in Russia, and that is a really good way to stay up on what is actually happening. So several of the Russian news agencies, I think probably equivalent to some of our news agencies, but some of their news agencies only present the information how they want you to know it, and this Johnson's Russia list tries to filter through and put tries to get to the truth of what's happening in Russia. Then for learning Russian, for those of you that are already studying Russian and already have a background in Russian, this website, lingualink.com, is a new initiative that was just started this September. And basically, as it says here, is that Moscow grandparents, so pensioners or retired individuals, can teach you or help you with your Russian. And they've set this up to help Russian pensioners or retired people to connect with those that are trying to learn Russian. And you can sign up on the website, and you have to have a Skype account, but they'll set up times when you can meet and speak with those individuals that are in Russia. So it's a really great way to speak with a native speaker. Or if you've never started Russian, or maybe you have started Russian and you're interested in it, I would recommend Duolingo. It's a great way you can download the app on your phone, and it reminds you. You can set your goal 15 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, or maybe just 10 minutes a day. And it will remind you that you need to practice. And it's really easy, makes it very attainable, and just short little drills to help you learn Russian. The other thing, if you're very interested in future studies, this was the last year of this program, of the Moscow Texas Connect program, but the UT office was applying for another group project abroad. This time it would be to Siberia. And they hadn't heard back, so it's kind of premature whether to say if it's going to be available or not, but they are definitely continuing different study abroad programs, and they also have other programs through their department. And these are the two, Dr. Mary Nurberger and then Mr. Nowacki, were both very instrumental or vital for this program to exist, and they are very, very, very good. Then, so it was organized through UT, but a lot of our excursions and a lot of our programs were, when we were over there, they had contracted out to SRAS, School of Russian and Asian Studies that are based out of Moscow. And apparently the first year they did it, Mr. Nowacki did everything, and it just got to be too much. So they have now the SRAS help them out with planning and a lot of the logistics of the trip and the study abroad program. But the SRAS also has their own programs, and on their websites, it's pretty good. It also just gives you resources about traveling there or about general education of Russian and Asian studies. But they too have study abroad programs that are available. They have a lot that go to St. Petersburg, and we met with some of them that were studying in their program, and they were quite pleased with their program. So that's another option. And then I just want to thank all of you for listening, and I want to thank the Russian Enrichment Program and the Russian Club for having me, and for all the previous speakers and events that they've hosted, as well as the scholarship. So one thing I didn't mention is that with this grant, most everything was covered. And that was not covered by the Department of Education funds was then stepped in and covered by a scholarship from the Russian Enrichment Program. And that is solely to the thanks of Mrs. McWilliams, Miss Jeanette McWilliams, and Mrs. Davis and her husband. So I want to extend to them my deepest gratitude for that. So with that, I would open it up for any questions, and that's it. Thank you. Yes?
I was wondering how you would describe the mood in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg.
The mood. Oh, I'm glad you asked me that. So when you first arrive, or at least when I first arrived, it was kind of intimidating because the people don't smile. When you pass someone in the US, you smile, you might nod and wave as if you know them or shoot them a little head nod. They are on a mission. Wherever they're going, that's their mission. And their facial expression is, there's no smiles, they don't look happy, but it's not because that they don't like you or because that they're angry. It's just they see no reason to smile. We even asked them about this, like, why are people in the street? Why don't you smile? And they said, well, why should we smile? If you smile at someone, then you're like laughing at them, or they think that their hair, something's messed up with their hair. So we then quickly stopped smiling because we would quickly be picked out as American, which some of us were trying not to look too American, but it didn't matter. As soon as we opened our mouth, we were American. But it was very busy, so the field was very busy. At first it was kind of a solemn, but then when you realized that it was just the way it was, you realized it was just mostly busy. So on the streets of Moscow, very busy, businesslike, and that contrasted greatly to St. Petersburg, where the atmosphere was a lot more laid back. In St. Petersburg, there was a lot more tourists, and it felt more, they kept describing it as more European. So it was a lot more open and a little bit more lively than Moscow. I wouldn't say lively because downtown Moscow at night was quite lively also, but a little bit more business-like to the atmosphere, I think, for Moscow. Yes, yeah, and that's Katusha. So from we went to Tulia, which is another, I didn't include this, but we went to the Armory Museum, or the Arms Museum at Tulia, and inside they have an incredible collection of all sorts of weapons back from the Tsar's time to the Soviet era and present day. And then outside they had several tanks and then Katusha. And in our Russian class, one of the songs that we learned was Katusha, and that actually was when we actually got to see it, was pretty cool to see the actual Katusha that was used basically to launch rockets off of the back of the truck. Yes, during World War II. Well, they were blueberries. If you translate the name, it would translate to blueberries, but they weren't like our blueberries. And I don't know, the plant that they came from was not a thick bush, but they would just be kind of little kind of shrubs about this tall and just a very skinny stalk, and you could just pick it right off of there. So they translated to blueberries, but they weren't exactly like our berries, but similar. I don't know.
What do they taste
They like blueberries. Yeah.
They look bigger in the picture, were they? Or are they still little?
They were still pretty little, about the size of our blueberries. I think some of the commercially grown blueberries would still be a little big for what these are. These were pretty small. We also I found some raspberries as well, and those looked pretty much the same as our raspberries. For income, there was, so in Moscow or just in okay, so in Moscow they've got all sorts of businesses. Like in one of our major cities, I met a lot of lawyers. It seemed like a lot of the students, I think it's because of the where I was living, that there was a lot of law students there, and they were actually then lawyers. Also, I mean, everything, teachers, businesses, lots of different businesses, and yeah, a lot of different things. When we got out to some of the other outside of Moscow, agriculture was not a huge thing, because the way that the agriculture or land worked was you were given a plot of land for 5 years, and then at the end of that 5 years you had to your time was up. And so if you had made any improvements during that time, well, sure, now the value of that land has gone up. Well, now they're going to charge you they're going to charge you more for that land, even though you've put everything into it. They still treat you as if you're just coming into the deal. So that was kind of discouraging a lot of people from going into agriculture. But now, actually, that the sanctions are on Russia, they're putting a little bit more money into the infrastructure, and they've changed the way that they allow people to lease land. Now you don't have to give up your lease after 5 years. So some of the people that we talked to, they were more encouraged by the way that some of the agriculture business was going at that time, as opposed to a few years ago. As far as any other, I can't think of any specific industry other than just a little bit of everything, I think, in the main city.
When you all traveled, did you stay in hotels? There was that one dairy farm, but other than that, was it hotels or?
It was dorms. When we went to St. Petersburg, we also stayed at a dorm. Although none of us really wanted to leave our dorm in St. Petersburg because it was 10 times nicer than our dorm in Moscow. but our dorms were still pretty good. They were livable.
What do you miss the most?
What do I miss?
What do you miss the most?
What do I miss the most? Well, I really miss having being surrounded by Russian all the time. It was always so fun to try and hear what they were saying, or figure something out, or look something up when you see a new sign. That I miss. And then probably the people, because I miss the progress that I was making in Russian in my Russian classes. My teachers were great, and then also the friends that I made there. It was really fun to get to know them. But I still have a few that I Skype or talk to them over the computer, so that's a good way. But yeah, I think that the people and the metro. Oh man, it's so nice.
But once you get to know them, they're
Right.
so incredibly hospitable.
And that's what, to follow up with not smiling on the street, once you actually get talking to them, and once you kind of form a bond or a relationship with them, then it's, I think, pretty much unbreakable. They are so sincere and really genuine, and really, really kind and caring. So it's really neat to see that. One person I don't know where this analogy came from, but they said that people in the United States are more like, or if you consider people as a peach, we're more like the peach if you think of it from the outside, where we're soft, smiling and open, as if we're really open. But then when you get to our deep thoughts or our deep concerns, we're a little bit more closed off. Once you get to that pit, it's hard to open the pit. Whereas the Russians are the opposite of that. It's hard to get even to crack into them, but then once you do that, there's so much that they are just willing to tell you about how they think about things or what they think about things and how they feel about some of their deepest thoughts. So that was a kind of an interesting analogy I thought that someone came up with, but it was definitely evident in talking with the people. Yes.
What about Putin's Cold War? Is it reflected in maybe
Putin's.
how we treated as an American? We're afraid of Putin.
Oh yes. So there's definitely the people there, the Russian people, several that we talked to, I think that some of them tolerate Putin. They're not satisfied with him by any means, but they also, I think they kind of respect the fact that he is such a strong leader and kind of feared by other nations. But they definitely portray the Western societies, or a lot of them would portray us in negative ways sometimes in the media, for sure. Also there we saw a sculpture in downtown Moscow, and it was a sculpture of the different things that a child coming into the world, different evil that they would see. And so it listed the different evils, and one of them was war. And on that statue of the one representing war was several different weapons, and all of them were Western-made weapons. Not a single one was Soviet. So just lots of little, sometimes very subtle things like that are thrown into the media and thrown into how they view things. We also sometimes tried to talk politics with them, asking them what they thought about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. One of the people that they thought that Trump was a joke, and that Hillary, they don't see why we keep talking about her emails. And then another one, thought that Hillary she's bad, right? And Trump, he's okay. So it was also a mix. Hearing American politics from their point of view was also kind of an interesting view too. Is a lot of mixed views as well, but they like to hear what we thought. So it was always fun.
I wanted to ask about your progress in language.
Oh, it
So
was.
what was your pretest score, and what was the rubric? How were you all assessed, and what was your post-test?
We haven't actually. They said that they were going to send us our scores, and they haven't yet. So I don't know. I can't tell you any hard numbers, but I can tell you for sure that when I took the written, we had two tests. One was an oral and one was a written one on the computer, or written. It was on the computer. And you can ask, well, my one roommate's not here. I was taking it at my house, and I told my roommate, I have no idea what they're asking me. What do I do? Do I just make up something? I don't know what the question's even asking. I can't write a response. I have no idea. And then when I finished, I understood everything from the test, and I was able to form complete responses on all of it. And then the same with the oral test. I know the day that I had to take the oral test, Miss Davis and the other Russian students were trying to help me out before, kind of warm me up and get me to practice. And then it went okay, I suppose. But then when I came back and I did the oral exam, the professor that was giving me the interview said that she was very impressed, that wow, you really did improve quite a lot. And I said thank you, because I also feel the same, because when I arrived in Russia, the first week was pretty rough, but then it quickly got better after that. So I felt that I improved immensely. I would get children's books and have the tutors read them to me and record them, and then just sit there and read the books again. listening to their recordings, and studied a lot to try and improve. Yes?
Do you find it harder now to keep up your Russian?
Yes, yeah, it's definitely a lot harder here when you're not bombarded with it all the time, and when you're not forced to use it. If you don't use it, you lose it for sure. So I try to use, Duolingo every day, try to go through the little apps and I was recommended books by my Russian professors over there that I also try and use to keep up with it. But it's definitely incredibly hard because the more pressing issues of a paper that's due this week, or a class that needs to be prepared for, definitely start taking precedence over that Russian again. So yes, it's harder, for sure.
How did you study vocabulary?
Vocabulary? The best way, actually, that I studied vocabulary was going to the grocery store and buying things and then figuring out what they were. Sometimes I bought things that I wasn't sure, or I wouldn't take the time to try and figure it out and read it. And then I would learn that it's actually, it was not what I thought it was. And so that you learn that pretty quick. That's memorable. Yes, and get some Russian. Otherwise, just talking with the tutors, talking with someone and saying it over, and then writing it over and over the words. But we had lots of readings that we would do, and so the first time you read it, you have to translate, every other word, and then you read it again and again, and then after so many times of reading it, you don't have to look those words up anymore. But having to force yourself to look up a word, that helps a lot too.
Conclude tonight's presentation. We wanted to thank you, Mary. So as an expression of our gratitude for your presentation, the ASU Russian Club, with the help of Jeanette McWilliams Russian Enrichment Fund, would like to present you with a $100 gift certificate to Amazon for your great books. And thank you again, all of you, for coming. I hope you enjoyed Mary's presentation, and you'll be leaving today with a little bit more knowledge on Russia and its culture. If you did like tonight's presentation, we'll be having another one November 10th, and this time it's going to be Mr. John Griffiths will be talking about Mr. Putin. And in April, we'll be having another one regarding Russian folklore, and we'll also be demonstrating how to make Russian dolls at that one. Flyers will be posted around campus before the event, so we hope to see you there, and thanks for coming. Wish you guys a great evening.